million. Yeah.
$2 million.
Cool. Better than me. What else? Who else has one? Yeah.
$10 million.
10 million. Better than me. Still not good. Better than me. Yep. Someone else has that one over here? Yeah.
Yeah, we think our numbers might be a little bit low, but $66,000.
All right, I'm investing. Right on. Back there? Yep.
300,000.
300,000. Cool. Cool. All right. Some of you probably found out that your business might be viable. If that's the case, your goal is to validate the assumptions that you have in that model, right? There's a bunch of guesses in there. For those of you that, hey, 66,000 to generate $1 million, that's awesome. Like, how can you validate that? Or even 300,000 to generate $1 million, that's awesome. You really need to start validating those assumptions. If your business is not viable, it's time to understand why. So dig into the model, figure out what assumptions you might have made in there that could be wildly off in your favor, maybe not in your favor. Understand the engine. You may try another business model. You may try another channel. You may try tweaking the assumptions in there, but this will give you a tool to start testing a bunch of things if it is then ultimately not viable. And then what you end up doing is as you're building your company, is you iterate, learn, and repeat on this process as you get more data. So once you might go talk to customers and get a sense of what your conversion rate is. You may do more research and learn what the actual cost per click is in Google AdWords. And so you're always refining this model to hopefully get it into a good place. And I think it is worth repeating that sometimes you're doing something that's new that no one's done before, so the model may not, even if the model doesn't add up, you still might want to pursue it because you think that the market may change, or as you go along you might get more efficient, or the market is so big that at the beginning you're willing to pay more to acquire $1 million, but as you get more effective and economies of scale, it may be worthwhile. So I want to be careful to say that, like, just because the numbers don't add up here, it doesn't mean you blankly should not do it, but you should just get to understand why the numbers aren't adding up and what do you need to learn to feel more comfortable with the business. What questions do you have on what you would do next?
I'm just curious, how many companies here came out with viable?
2?
2? Okay.
Yeah. Remember that those of you that didn't, you only tried one channel, you only tried one business model, you have some assumptions in there, not all is lost, but now you can iterate on those. Hopefully you won't spend 2 years building a company like mine that would cost $100 million to generate $1 million. So you now know the market model, which is to build a bottoms-up model based on however much cash you want to be sitting on your table at the end of the year. This model does not include costs, so there's a whole piece of the model below $1 million that we didn't touch at all. But the whole point was, like, let's just see what it would take to generate $1 million in revenue. If you want, you can then model out below the $1 million, like what does it cost you in salaries, in development, in infrastructure costs, et cetera, because this $1 million doesn't necessarily end up as cash on your table at the end of the year. But I think it's worth starting from $1 million in revenue and working your way back up. That's all I got. If you're interested, we may do this, but if you're interested, I actually prefer to do this in Excel or in Google spreadsheets. I think it's fun in a workshop to do it on the table because you can interact with it more together. But I end up transitioning it from sticky notes into a model because then it's really easy to tweak the numbers and see how it impacts your model over time. So these are the 3 models that we explored for our business, the actual models. You'll see this e-commerce photo books one, these numbers will look really familiar to you because these are the numbers I walked through with you. We also had an advertising model that we thought would work, but when we modeled that out, it would cost us $25 million to generate $1 million, so better than the photo books, but still not good. And then we had a third model, which was an enterprise play where we sold our software to tour operators who were taking people on trips and they wanted people to blog for them. and they would pay us for our technology. In this model, it cost us $150,000 to generate $1 million in revenue. So ultimately, what we did in our company is we pivoted and became a B2B company because that business model ended up working out a lot better. So if you want to see what those numbers were and what the inputs were for our company, I'll leave this up here. But what questions do you have? Yeah.
So the pivot worked, and then you, okay.
Yeah, so the story for us is we spent 2 years being a B2C company. We thought we were gonna sell these photo books. Thought we would have advertising on our travel blogs. We never could make it work just because we couldn't acquire customers affordably. But what we found was when we looked at the usage patterns of our customers, of our users, a lot of them were going on these organized tours, like a Carnival cruise, a Machu Picchu trek, a study abroad, a spring break trip. And so we started sending the blogs to these tour companies, and they were like, oh my God, we've always wanted to enable our travelers to blog. We want them to share this on social media. We want the data to understand how the trip experience is going, because it was an authentic story versus a review. And they said, we'll pay you for that software. So we ended up pivoting, and we were still aligned with our mission, which our mission was, how do we get people to tell more travel stories in hopes that more people would go out and travel? We just used tour operators as our channel, and they paid us. So it solved our distribution and was a really good revenue stream. And the average tour company was paying us 40 grand per installation of our software. And so that ended up being the successful part of our business. But the thing, and candidly, like, I don't think if we had set out, like, in the first month, would we have known that? Like, it took us certainly at least a year of having a product in market to find that insight. But what we definitely made a mistake on was when we didn't realize that building the photo book and advertising product was never gonna work out until we spent way too long. We could have figured that out much earlier. So, candidly, I think we got a little bit lucky in that we stayed alive long enough to realize that, hey, there was actually this seam of gold in our company that wasn't what we had planned, and we had enough capital to take advantage and try that sort of pivot, which was pretty lucky, but we still could have saved at least a year's worth of work. Yeah.
I had a question about, so what if you have like a model and it comes out and like you have to spend more money to make like your first million, but what if like that sort of like the customers you acquire are like reoccurring, like paying customers? Because I know there's like a lot of big like tech companies out there that use a lot of their VC money just for like customer acquisition, where it's not profitable, but then like in the long run it's profitable.
Yep. Yeah, you're totally right. And the way you do that is you add more variables into this model to understand the lifetime value of a customer versus the annual value of a customer, and that can change your model. Okay. So absolutely. And most tech companies that raise VC spend in advance of profitability, knowing that, or in the hopes that those customers stay and are sticky, and over time they become more profitable. But the way you're totally thinking about it the right way.
Okay, so you could use like
Yep.
you just have to tweak the model a little bit.
Yep, and this is sort of like the simplistic version of just like what does 1 year in time look like, but if you wanted to build a real sophisticated one, you would have reoccurring customers you would model year 1, year 2, year 3, and over time, hopefully your acquisition costs would go down and your reoccurring revenue would go up, and at some point those would cross, and when they cross, that's when it becomes super lucrative. But a lot of the tech companies that we admire and look at, like they still haven't hit that inflection point yet. They're still losing money, but they're raising money and they have high valuations on the expectation that at some point they're gonna cross.
Okay, great.
Can I
Yeah.
tack on? For SaaS businesses, there's what's called the golden percent year over year to not be profitable. If you're growing 0% year over year, you should be generating 40% profit. So if you're growing 30% year over year, you should be 10% profitable. If you're growing 100% year over year, you can be 60% not under profitability for SaaS. So that's one way to think about the growth thing. So you kind of painted this a little bit of a doom and gloom like picture around the business. I suspect you're being a little humble around this. So can you tell us how the business ended up?
Yeah, so we spent 2 years building the business. That's these left 2 columns here. That was not successful. We had that insight kind of on our deathbed that there might be a better way to use this technology. And then for the next 2 years, we sold into tour companies, built a nice business on that, and then ultimately we were acquired by AOL in 2012 on Halloween, which is kind of cool, and merged into MapQuest, which probably none of you use, but still has 50 million users. So then we ended up deploying our technology to the 50 million users at MapQuest, which was pretty cool. It was a good outcome, and then after that, I joined up at Techstars because we took our company Everlater through Techstars in 2009. They were our first investor in us, so kind of fun to come full circle for me and now invest in companies through Techstars. Work with Zach.
Thanks for the news.
Yeah. What other questions? Yeah.
What year was your pivot?
Founded the company in 2008. Pivot was in 2010, and then we were acquired in 2012.
So after Techstars.
After Techstars, yep. I have another version of this presentation. I can show you this slide. This is like, this I couldn't get this out of my head for about a really long time. This was our usage chart. This is September, so I guess this is like August 09 to February 2010, so what is that, like 6-month period? Like this is basically our usage chart, right? It sucked. So, and it was, we graduated from Techstars right here. We got a huge bump after demo day because people were interested in what we were doing, but my big lesson learned for me is that PR is very short-lived. And so like, hey, we got this huge PR bump here, but it didn't really translate into any meaningful growth or usage. The New York Times wrote a story about us right here, bump in usage, but nothing long-term. We just kind of like fumbled along here. And just to point out here on this axis here, this is 1,000 and 2,000. That's not missing 3 digits or a comma. Like that is 1,000 visitors and 2,000 visitors. Like this is not an interesting business and not a fun business to run when no one is using your product. So the embarrassing thing is it took us like, this goes on and on and on, like probably over to like here, until we realized, hey, what the heck are we doing? So.
I think there's a question out
Oh yeah.
How did you guys get, did New York Times write on their own, or how did you guys get an article?
It was sort of fortunate. They were covering the tech boom in Boulder, and we were super involved in the community, and so they covered us as part of that article. But I'm not anti-PR. I just think it's not a reoccurring strategy to use to sustainably grow a business. And you can see that right here, right? It's like it literally did nothing. Felt good. It seemed cool. My parents loved it.
That's the problem with PR. So it feels great, it does nothing.
What other questions do you have on really, could be anything.
You got the MD of a big tech program here. Ask away.
Yeah.
So, for us, we're making like physical products and we're trying to sell them to stores or online or just get the word out. How much more expensive is getting customers in the beginning, and how much would that go down? Because at first no one knows about us, so we gotta find a lot of people. But if we get into the market and we get some customers, can that translate to not having to spend so much on AdWords and just getting more customers that way?
Yeah, over time that gets more efficient for sure. But the channels are also, each channel is different. So for example, like early on, you probably don't have a big SEO rank, which is your rank in Google based on how authoritative your site is. And so early on, you might have to pay for traffic on Google, but over time you build this history of content or this credibility, and so you can spend less acquiring traffic and you're gonna get more organic on Google. So that's sort of a combination of 2 channels there that over time can come together in your favor. As you build economies of scale, you might be able to negotiate cheaper distribution partnerships with companies. So yes, in theory, over time, the cost should come down. You usually front load the acquisition costs early on. you wanna add anything?
Yeah, the other thing to keep in mind is, as you start to get competition, you'll have more than one company bidding on the same keywords, and so your cost per keyword can skyrocket. And you can actually, wake up one day and everything just continually gets more and more expensive to, deliver the same number of customers in. That's very common. It's why Google is a money printing press, because they will take any margin that's in a market that's efficient, so any market that's, or category that's relying solely on Google keywords, in 100% of the economic margin of that category, theoretically Google can scoop up.
And they're doing that in travel. Travel's a big one where their biggest spenders are travel, because the ticket prices are so big, so like all of the margin now is going to online giants in travel. Yeah.
Sell business to business with only about 200 users a day, because from a business perspective, that doesn't seem to be super attractive.
So this was the cool thing that we figured out, which was the businesses that we were selling to didn't care about our audience. All they cared about was deploying our software to their audience. So the cool thing about what we figured out was we were struggling to acquire users and we had no way to make money from them. Working with tour companies solved both those. So the first is they knew when people were traveling, they were their customers, and so they promoted our product to their customers. So that solved our distribution, and they got so much value from the content and that service for them, they paid us to do it. So these tour companies didn't even care about our existing audience, they just wanted our software for their customers. Does that make sense?
Yeah, interesting.
So that was, for us, it was this holy grail moment where we're like, oh my God, this solves our two key problems. We don't know how to make money from our customers, we don't know where to find them. Oh, these companies are gonna pay us to deploy our technology to their customers, like, oh, you know?
Yeah, that's interesting.
So I'm thinking about like a Twitter or Snapchat scenario where they have plenty of users but no revenue in the beginning. What are your thoughts on that specifically, of thinking, okay, if we focus on getting users, the cash can come later because we have an audience that could be marketed to at some point in time. So it's like you have a actual activation threshold where you get above a certain number of users, then you have this market that you can
Becomes
advertise to. Yeah.
Just in case, let me restate the question in case people couldn't hear it, which was, how do we think about companies like Twitter and Snapchat who generally, they say build up a huge audience, but don't really know how to monetize them well or get a lot of value, even though they're not making much money? How do we think about that? I mean, all of the value of those is on the potential to monetize that audience sometime in the future. And why people continue to invest in them is the most finite resource we have is your attention and your eyeballs. And so these companies are really good at capturing your time and your attention. And the hope is that over time they'll be able to monetize that in some way. And so it's all about the potential. And in those cases, I don't know if you've heard this, but like you are the product actually for companies like that. And so they have this huge valuable asset, which is a ton of eyeballs, a ton of attention. They just have to figure out how to monetize it. And what you're seeing with companies like Twitter was sort of the golden child for a long time because they had all these eyeballs and they had plans to monetize it. But they really suffered and struggled at actually doing that. And the stock price has fallen a lot and there's a lot of turmoil there. I think Snapchat is probably about to face that same problem where for a while they just sort of grew, they absorbed market share, they absorbed attention, and they were planning on at some point monetizing it, but they still haven't really figured out how to do that. And I think we'll see a little bit of a reckoning come. The company that did that super well and figured it out was Facebook. They built this really targeted ad network on top of Facebook, and they're doing super well, but what you're seeing with like a Twitter and a Snapchat versus a Facebook is it's like investors will give you a while to figure it out, but if you don't figure it out, it becomes a problem.
I think Snap's trading at 1/3 their IPO price now.
Yep. And I think Twitter's below IPO price too. So, does that answer your question?
Yeah.
I personally, I think those businesses are really risky to go into because they're just freaking hard.
Let's thank our speaker.
Well,